Today we are in Gainesville, Florida. In sunny Gainesville, Florida, I might point out, given the winter we've had this year in most parts of the country. Some of you with memories of that may appreciate the fact that although it's spring-like here, we're in March of 2014, it's quite a dramatic change from, say, Chicago or some of the places farther north. I'm talking this morning with Claire M. Germain, who is the Associate Dean for Legal Information and Clarence T. Tissell Professor of Law at the Levin College of Law of the University of Florida. I should also note that in recognition of her many years as Director of the Library at Cornell, she is also the Edward Cornell Law Librarian, retired, and Professor of Law Emerita of the Cornell Law School. Claire, as is sort of our custom in these conversations, could you start by telling a little bit about your life, both when you were young and perhaps more currently?
Okay. You know what this is, right?
No, I can't see it.
That's the little, it's the Legion of Honor.
Oh, the Legion of Honor. Okay.
Most people, like photographers, they want to remove it. They think it's a speck of dust.
Oh.
But in France, they
Well, you look very nice. I'm not going to criticize it. In the Legion of Honor, I wouldn't dare. Yeah, in fact, I think it shows up.
Okay.
You have to see it on a bigger screen, but
yeah.
It will show up.
Okay. Sure. Thank you, Pat, first for doing this interview. I think it's wonderful that you get on the road and you crisscross the country asking librarians to share their experiences.
Well,
so,
I certainly enjoy doing it, as I've said on a number of these interview videos. So anybody that's watched very many of them will pick up on that.
Good.
But I appreciate your willingness to be part of it today, Claire. You're an important part of our profession, and
well,
I think you'll have a nice amount to contribute to the overall history of law librarianship.
Okay, thank you. So as everybody can tell, I'm originally from France, so I was born and raised in France. I was born in Chaumont, which is a town in the east of France, and when I was 10, my family moved to Paris. My father worked for the Ministry of Finances. My mother was a homemaker. She raised us 3 children. So I lived in Paris until I was 22, and I went to the United States. And in the US, I've lived in first Denver, Colorado, then Durham, North Carolina. I've lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I've lived in Ithaca, New York, and then now Gainesville, Florida. I moved to the United States when I was 22. So I met my husband in Germany when I was a young student, and he's American, and then we got married, and we have a son, Nicolas, whom we love dearly, who is now grown. When, for many years, my parents came to visit us, and we traveled a lot together, so that was a great part of our life.
Well, that sounds all fascinating. Having visited Paris on 2 occasions myself, I can always wonder how anyone could be tempted to leave that marvelous city. It's really a fantastic place, at least for those of us who visited it as tourists.
Yes.
Perhaps living there, the reality is it's like, you know, life other places. Some good, some bad, everything. Yeah, good. Well, could we talk a little bit about your education? I know you began your education. You have your law degree from the university in Paris, and you have other degrees here from the United States. Could you talk a little bit about your formal education, the degrees, and where you got them?
Yes, I was a little bit early in my studies, so after my French baccalaureate that I got when I was 15, I studied German, so I have a degree in German, and I studied in Erlangen, in Nuremberg. That's where I met my future husband when I was 17. And then I have a law degree from Paris also, and then I moved, after having these 2 degrees, I was 22, so I received a fellowship from Louisiana State University to study comparative law and get a master's degree. And so I got my degree. And then I moved to Denver, Colorado, and I studied law library science. So I got a master's of law library science. Law librarianship, it's called. Yeah.
That was, you studied with Al Coco, was his program.
Yeah, I did study with Al Coco,
Yeah.
and it was a great experience, but I have to say, I was bewildered at the time by the West Digest system and the key number system, but I found my way, and Al Coco was a great teacher and a great mentor, yes.
Well, I can certainly verify the fact that he's a good teacher and a mentor. I had the privilege when I first graduated with my degrees. My first job was at the University of Houston. And Al Coco was the director there at the time, and I was with him for 3 years, and
Yes.
in many ways it was the most pleasant and carefree 3 years of my entire career. He gave me a lot of responsibility, a lot of direction,
Yes.
but he let me do it.
Yes.
And I really appreciated that, but because he was the boss, I didn't have to worry like a
Yes.
director does of
Yes.
being responsible for everything that was we were doing. It was nice 3 years.
And I think himself, wasn't he a student of Marian Gallagher?
He was,
So that
as was I,
yeah,
actually.
So he had created the Masters of Law Librarianship, which was probably modeled after the model in Washington.
It was, with a few enhancements. Al was a little more focused on practical training than
Yes.
Marian had been. But he'd been through her program. In fact, I had been at the University of Washington as a high school student working at the law library.
Oh, really?
For Marian and Viola Bird and the rest of them, doing, the usual sorts of things,
Yes.
like sitting at the desk and checking books in and out and filing loose leaves and all that. And Al Coco had been a law library student during that period. I had known him when I was probably about 17. And,
Really?
yeah, and then I came back, and it was like working for an old friend in many ways. He's a very special person.
Yes.
Yeah, and remains. I was able to talk with him for this history about a year ago, and
Wonderful.
it was like old times' sake. We enjoyed that immensely. Yeah. So you had a good mentor, and before we start talking about what you've done with the degrees, which have been considerable in my opinion, and that I'm sure of everybody else, could we talk about whether you have any passions or hobbies or special interests that sort of occupy your time, perhaps when you're not working?
Yes, of course. I have many hobbies and pastimes. I like to travel because, fundamentally I'm an international person. But when I travel, I like to get to know the people, explore the culture, not just be a tourist. So, I've had a lot of opportunities to travel. My husband and I, we've gone to professional meetings and then find a little time to do some tourism. One recent experience that I really liked was last May. I had a research leave for 1 month, and we went to French Polynesia. So for 1 week, we rented an apartment in Papeete, and I did some work on the political status, because French Polynesia has a lot of autonomy, but is part of the French Republic. And should it stay that way? Should it become more independent like some of the other South Pacific nations? So I met with the dean of the law school and my colleague Yves-Louis Sage, and then other professors, and I did some work there. And then we spent some time exploring 10 different islands. We went all the way up to the Marquesa Islands. And everybody speaks French there as well as Tahitian. So that was a great experience. Some of the nice travel opportunities I had were to go to, one was to go to India as part of an International Association of Law Libraries meeting, and then we went for 1 week in the Rajasthan.
Now that's the Taj Mahal.
Exactly. I didn't explain what it was because I thought it
Well,
was
we're going to
self-explanatory.
pretend we're not playing with a new adventure. We're actually using 3 cameras, and you're using a slideshow,
Yes.
which I will try and edit in appropriately to the actual video.
Yeah, I thought that might help maybe illustrate some things or
well, I think
capture attention.
it potentially makes it a little scarier for me because I've not done this yet, but more interesting. nonetheless, and I think our viewers will appreciate this extra effort.
I like, and you know, I go to France several times a year for my work, because in the various places where I worked, that was part of my contract. I like to go hiking. I like to go to the beach. That's why Florida is wonderful, because you go to the Atlantic coast, the Gulf Coast, to the south. So it's perfect. I like to speak foreign languages. I like to be able to communicate with people. So I'm learning Spanish right now, because Florida is pretty close to Central South America. My nephew and niece live in Munich, so that brings me back to German, that I used to master very well. And then I like to cook. I'm a good cook. I like especially to make pastries, and an apple tart is my signature dish.
Well, I certainly had the pleasure of dining with you and Stuart yesterday at your house, and I was very spoiled at that dinner.
Thank you.
I appreciated it very much. Well, you've certainly, you travel, you cook, you do a lot of things, it sounds like that, but you have a characteristic that many of the people in our profession had, primarily more when I was new. There were a lot of European legal scholars who had come here, many of them, I think, around the time right after World War II.
Yes.
And they became law librarians of various types. Some of them were academic directors, some were in government libraries, and others. At least one or two very prominent ones were firm librarians in Chicago and places like that. Now you are sort of a latter-day version of somebody who's come across, I think the Brits call it the pond, I don't know what the French call it, they may have another name for it, at the Atlantic, and settled here and became a prominent member of the law library profession. Could you talk a little bit about that kind of experience and maybe focus on some of those people?
Yes.
I know you've known some of them as well.
Yeah, and you know, I have a personal history or reference to it, because when I was a young student at LSU, I was writing a thesis on what's called les vices rédhibitoires, redhibitory vices, which hidden defects in something that you buy, like a car, like you buy a lemon. How can you get your money back? So I was doing a comparative study of French law, Louisiana law, and the UCC. And so I had an office, and then one day I went to my office to do research, to do my work, and then lo and behold, on the table there was a mountain of books and materials, and they had appeared by magic, but who had provided them to me? It was none other than a librarian by the name of Kate Wallach.
Oh yes, and Kate was a luminary in our field.
And I didn't even appreciate it at the time. I was only 22, but she kind of almost changed my life, because she was a German lawyer from the University of Cologne, and she had emigrated to the US because of the Nazi time. Then she got I don't know if she got a law degree or a library science degree in the US, but then she became the director at LSU, and she's the one who actually built the foreign and comparative law collection. And then I knew her in her latter years when she was the foreign law librarian. But she's the one, who really inspired me in a way to become a law librarian, because I was so taken aback by all the research help that she had provided to me and all her knowledge.
So this was before you went to Denver to study.
Yes, that was when I was. She's the one actually who gave me the idea to become a law librarian, because here I had my French law degree, I was getting my American law degree, but I was not really interested in taking the bar exam either in France or in the US. So I didn't know exactly what to do. And I almost got a job as the foreign law librarian at LSU, because I think she would have liked for me to follow her. But then the chancellor at the time wanted the librarian to have a library science degree, so it didn't work out. But she is, as you suggest, one of the several international people who came because of there was quite a few of them because of the Nazi time, the war. And those, I didn't know all of them, but some of them also came because of the communist regime. So I got to know, I didn't know, for instance, there was Bill Stern, who was at the Los Angeles County Law Library. I didn't really know him very well, but I think he was influential in starting the ILL, the International Association of Law Libraries. I knew Adolf Sprutz in Chicago, who was very prominent, but there were several, Igor Kavas.
Yes.
And then some people came to the Law Library of Congress, like Ivan Sipkov, so that was more from the communist states. Yeah. And then today we have people who come from China, from India, so there are quite a few international people who come and find a good position in the United States. So the lawyers like Kate Wallach, some of them became law professors and some of them became law librarians. And in a way, it was a great way to combine the subject expertise with a more the library science competency. So that made kind of a nice niche.
I remember Dr. Sipkov, particularly. He was the head of the European Law Division at the Law Library of Congress. And I remember one time when I was fairly new, living in Washington, D.C. and working there, going down to meet him. And in those days, they didn't have the nice new building that the Library of Congress is in now. They were all crowded in the old building, and I mean crowded. The old beautiful reading room with all the decorative ceilings and so on. It was all covered up with scaffolding and stacks and little cubbyhole offices. And Dr. Sipkov was in one of those when I met him. And it was quite he was quite a person. I really enjoyed him over the years, getting to know him. They were all, as you said, a lot of them had come because of the Nazis or even the communist era starting. And these were people who were very prominent when I became a law librarian. And they were basically in the process, many of them retiring, which of course created a nice job market for those of us in my position, which we appreciated, but in the right sense. Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about some of these people. Now you've already mentioned that Kate Wallach played a role in sort of attracting you to law librarianship. Were there any other factors that sort of influenced your decision to become a law librarian as opposed to something else? Well,
I think it presented the opportunity to combine my subject knowledge with the library science degree, so that it would present great opportunities for work. And when I moved to Denver, my husband is from Denver, Colorado. Actually, his family came at the turn of the century, which is rare. But since we were living in Denver, my husband very helpfully said, Claire, there is a program, a master's in law librarianship that you can do in 1 year because you already have the law degree. So I thought that was kind of a win-win proposition. So I didn't get into librarianship because I liked books or because I worked in a library, but I thought it was very, it seemed to be like the right thing to do. Actually, yeah. And librarianship in the United States is a very dynamic profession. I never thought about it before, because in other countries, like in France, you're more like a curator of books, especially at the time, rather than somebody very service-oriented. And fundamentally, I'm still a reference librarian at heart, so I want to do as much as I can for faculty and students.
Well, I think that is probably the key to success for anybody in our profession, is reaching out to the users and adding value to the equation and helping them find what they need and understand what they're looking for. Now, you've had a very a stellar career, if I can frankly condescendingly say that, or whatever it is. You were the law librarian at Cornell, which is a major place, through much of your career. And then you retired there, and now you're here at the University of Florida, following in the footsteps of a stellar member of our profession in her own right. You want to talk a little bit about perhaps your career and some of the specific things you've done, which I've mentioned, and others, if any, and maybe talk a little bit about that.
Okay, and then maybe I can talk a little bit about what I see as my mentors, people who've influenced my career.
Yeah, well, I assume you probably have encountered them as you've moved into the profession.
Yes, because I have to say, and maybe it's the same thing for everybody, I had no idea when I entered the profession what could be done with it. So that was kind of amazing. So when I think about who has had influence and impact on my professional life, I think first about the fact that I worked with great scholars and practitioners, and it helped me focus on the most important aspects of legal information and the role it plays both in practice and in scholarship. So I've always seen librarianship intimately connected with practice and scholarship. So some key people with whom I worked, the first one I wanted to mention is Professor Kazimierz Czybarski, who was one of those emigres. So he came from Poland during the war, and he became a librarian at the Library of Congress, and then he became a law professor at Duke. And when I came to Duke, I've worked at Duke, Cornell, and Florida. So when I came to Duke, he took us under his wing, he and his wife, and they were like family to us. So he was a great mentor. Then I will mention Wallace Baker, the son of the one who founded Wallace Baker and McKenzie in Chicago. So Wallace Baker founded the law firm in Paris. And we became good friends because when I was at Duke, his son was getting an MBA from Duke, which is, the business school is close to the law school. And so Wallace Baker, when I wrote my book, he wrote the foreword, and then we visited many times when I would go to France or he would come to North Carolina. And he was very, he knew a lot about international law practice, so he understood the need for good research skills in that area. Professor Kevin Claremont at the Cornell Law School, one of the most scholarly professors, very adept at legal research, had a lot of impact on my professional career in the sense of the importance of what a librarian can do to help a faculty. Professor Blanc-Jouvin, who is a professor from the University of Paris I, who was influential on the international programs of Cornell, Cornellian also. Chief Justice Canivet, who was the Chief Justice of the French Supreme Court, now on the Constitutional Council. Sir Basil Marchesini, who did a lot, who is an iconic figure, a professor of comparative law in London, who's done so much worldwide, big impact. Would like to mention also my current dean, Dean Bob Jerry, the best dean I've had, even though I've had some pretty good deans.
Let's hope your past deans don't hear this tape then. But sounds very nice. You're fortunate.
Maybe what I can say about his mentorship specifically, I mean, some have been great deans, but Dean Jerry is a great mentor right now because I admire his leadership of the law school, but also the way he interacts and treats people at all levels. Even if he has something a little critical to say, he knows how to say it in a very nice way. And that's a skill that not everybody has. So he treats people in a very fair way. Now, as far as librarians as mentors, I've had several, and I have mentors almost every day because when I have a young library staff member who is very techno-savvy, she mentors me or he mentors me. So it goes in every different ways. But you mentioned Kathy Price, and Kathy Price is the librarian who hired me at Duke for my very first job. And now I'm following into her footsteps, and I've always admired what she has done. I will mention also Dick Danner, the director of the Duke Law Library, because he came as associate at Duke, and then he became the director. And we worked on many projects.
Very accomplished one.
Very
from everything
accomplished.
I've been told.
Yes, very accomplished. And we've worked on many projects together. I spent 17 years at Duke. And he especially provided very good advice to me whenever I would ask him when I was at Cornell as a young library director, because I think young library directors need a lot of mentoring. You know, it's a kind of a different new world. And then I will mention also my good friends and colleagues, Radu Popa from NYU and Blair Kaufman from Yale. We've worked a lot. You can see we have a good time together.
Yeah, I can see that on the slide.
We work on projects right now. internationally within IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations. So we're on the law library section, but we also know each other from NELCO, which is a consortium in the Northeast, the New England Consortium.
Yes.
When I was at Cornell, luckily for me, they accepted me even though I'm not exactly
You were on the wrong
England.
side of the Hudson River, I remember,
Yes,
but they
exactly.
still invited you in.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
good.
So we saw each other very regularly, and they always provided good advice. So that was they are great mentors. And then and then of course I've come across many law librarians, both in the United States, in France, in other countries, because of my international work. And so I don't want to mention any more names because I'm going to forget a few people.
Forget somebody and then they're mad at you.
But I think what is specific about the library profession, it's a great profession where people really don't compete with each other, but they help each other. So I think that it's very nice to work in teams. That's what the profession is good for. And I hope that, now I can be a mentor to somebody. As I say, people can mentor me and I can mentor them.
I have a suspicion you are an accomplished mentor and you've had a lot of experience as a mentor.
Yeah, well, it's part of life, and you mentor.
It's a
you
very
try to do your
pleasant part
best,
of life, in my opinion, to help somebody and then see them develop and perhaps even achieve more than you have yourself in some cases.
Exactly. That's
nice
even
feeling.
better when you see how well they do. And then, of course, I wanted to mention, last but not least, my husband, Stuart Pazewski, because he's my best friend and confidant, and he advised me, he especially listens to me every day about telling me about things that are going on. So he worked for Cornell, and right now he still works for Cornell as a telecommuter. So he works in the Industrial and Labor Relations School, and which specializes in workplace issues and staff management. So. So
he was
those are
describing his work a little bit to me last evening when we were talking, and he can actually work from here in Florida, and he only has to go to the campus on a few occasions a term to interact directly with his students, and it works well. And
he runs an electronic news service on all aspects of workplace issues, and it's very successful. He has a lot of subscribers, so that he can do from anywhere in the world.
Oh, that's the advantage of the digital era, I think, is that it does empower one to, eliminates the need to be in one particular physical place.
You've had an interesting career. You want to talk a little bit about what it was like, perhaps, to come here to the University of Florida and follow, your predecessor, Betty Taylor. She was somebody that we all thought very highly of. It must have been a well-organized library, but times are changing. Would you like to talk a little bit about some of the things you're doing that perhaps because of the change to digital from paper and so on?
Everybody knows, it's tried to say that the business of libraries is kind of turned upside down. It's fundamentally changing, like a tsunami. But I do think that it's the most important thing for a library is to help and, I would say, be very as responsive as possible to the needs of faculty and students. And I would go one step further to anticipate what they might want to know that they don't know. So no matter what's the format. So now, of course, you can do so much more, but it's a little tricky to do it because there are so many different ways to approach the information. And faculty, especially, are a little bit at a disadvantage because they don't necessarily keep up with the latest technology. So what we're doing at Florida and many other libraries, we try to be as responsive as we can. We try to teach. We put a lot of emphasis on teaching, and so we teach a course we teach all the 1Ls a separate course in legal research. So it's connected to the legal writing in a way that we try to adjust the assignments so that it makes sense to the students. But that way, I think it's very important to concentrate on developing good research strategies, not only knowing how to do Westlaw or Lexis, but overall. So we put a lot of emphasis on that.
Or even doing Westlaw and Lexis more efficiently than some people have allegedly done it in the past.
Yes, yes, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. We also try to go as far as possible with the faculty liaison system, and I personally believe, as a philosophy, in the personal touch. So not having one librarian who serves all the faculty. Some people do it that way. If it works for them, it's okay. But I believe in building a personal relationship between the liaison librarian and the faculty, because the librarian has a lot of subject knowledge, so they can go deeper other than go to Hein Online if you need something. You know, if they can familiarize themselves with the field, antitrust law, international sales law, then they can help the faculty in ways that somebody who is not a subject specialist may not be able to go as far as that. So I believe in the personal service. Now we are doing innovative projects too, because I think we may be the first school where librarians are actually involved in a MOOC. I don't know if you know what a MOOC is.
No, I don't.
It's it's a jargon. It's a massive online course. There is a big company called Coursera, and they are helping us, and we do that through the university. We're doing a course with the law school. It's an introduction to US law for global students. And we have 2 librarians who are, so it's going to be contract law, basic intro to US law. I'm doing a part on legal traditions, civil law, common law. I'm doing the American jury in a comparative perspective. And 2 librarians are going to provide research exercises on various areas of the law. So I think it's very exciting because it's a way to reach out. It's free, but we already have 4,000 people signed up for it
4,000, and I assume all over the world can access this.
So it's great kind of to promote the teaching of US law, to make our law school well known internationally. So it's what is nice, I think, for us, and I think I would say for as many libraries as possible in this day and age, is to not to have the library self-standing, but to connect, to be as intimately connected with the life and the programs of the law school as possible. Like do work with the clinic, do work with the various centers, but not only in a perfunctory way, not only I've done my work because I sent my email to this group, even though I didn't get any response, but actually walk over there, offer services, give examples of how you can be helpful. So that's what we're doing at Florida. That's how I see the present and the future.
Well, you know, I'm sort of intrigued by your discussion of this massive online teaching. And, you know, there's so much talk today in legal education circles about outreach programs, or a professor perhaps could do a course that could be then broadcast to other law schools and make more efficient use of some of the expertise in our legal education system.
I think
it sounds like you're doing a version of that now.
Exactly, and that can be repeated. You know, once you have it pat down, you can, you know, send it. You don't have to redo the whole thing. It can be repackaged. What is helpful also is to teach a research class in as many subject classes as possible. So we systematically ask faculty in the seminars where they ask students to write papers to teach a class, and that's helpful too. Yes, it's almost like a teaser. You know, we don't know exactly where it's going to go, but it's a very interesting experiment, and you know, it's nice to have librarians associated with the law school project too. Maybe, did you want to talk about some of my highlights of my professional career?
Well,
the Duke years, I spent quite a bit of time at Duke between 1977 and 1993. So those I consider to be my formative years. So it was my first professional job. I had applied for it without knowing there was a job because my husband had a degree from Duke and he said, why don't you apply? And then I was hired. Kathy Price hired me. So I moved through the ranks. I started as a reference librarian, and then I got promotions, and I ended up as associate director and a senior lecturer in law. So our son was born there. I had a lot of German and French-speaking friends. So during that time, I taught US legal research. I started a course on foreign and international legal research under the initiative or the suggestion of Dean Pam Gann, who then became the president at Claremont College in California. And I wrote 2 books, so those were my activities. Then at Cornell, I was at Cornell between 1993 and 2011, so I think I could do more because I was the director there. So the focus, I followed in the footsteps of Jane Hammond, who is another iconic figure in law librarianship, very prominent, especially on the ABA Council on Legal Education.
I remember working with her there. She was on the council, and I was the AELL's observer to the council. And we were working on the library standards at that time. And Roger Jacobs was also in the mix, so the 3 of us collaborated, and it was a nice experience.
Yes. Yeah, so we focused at the time on increasing services to faculty and students. So we introduced the concept of personal liaison. We taught legal research to the 1Ls. And we also focused on moving the library more into the digital age. So we did a lot of web projects. So the first website for the International Court of Justice, and then the first official mirror site. And we did also the first mirror site for the International Labour Organization. I discovered the rare book collection, which at Cornell is amazing, and I fell in love with it. So we did a lot of outreach programs to show it to the students. So that took a lot of time. We also had the opportunity to acquire the papers of Wild Bill Donovan. I don't know if you've heard of him. He was.
I've heard the name. He was he a flyer?
He was the special assistant to the special prosecutor in the Nuremberg trials. Okay. And then also the founder of the OCC, which then became the CIA. So and
that's right. That's where I remember the name.
Yes, his papers were terrific, and they had been left languishing in a corner of a law firm. And he should have returned them to the government, but he didn't. So they were rediscovered by a young law associate. Then they gave us, Henry Korn, a Cornell alumnus, gave us the collection. And we started digitizing it. And we discovered there was a psychological study of Hitler. And it made the cover of the New York Times because these materials hadn't been looked at since the war. So that was kind of exciting, because it's exciting when you work in a library and you discover something a little bit out of the ordinary. So it's
especially something of that kind of interest, broad interest to an awful lot of historians and others.
Exactly, exactly. We had people come from England, and then they wrote books on the basis of the archival material that they had discovered. So we did, I loved Cornell, I loved all the things we did, but then the University of Florida called me, and at that time I thought maybe it would be nice to live in a warmer, sunnier climate. So, and then to take on new challenges. So that's how I left.
So your predecessor, Jane Hammond, also now lives in Florida.
Florida, yes.
I just recently found that out.
Yes.
She's down in Sarasota.
Yeah, well, I hope I can go down and see her, because I think it's so interesting and important to reminisce with people who've been in the profession before, just to get their impressions of how things have changed. And of course, I'm talking to you, and you're the one who is doing all of that.
I've already been in touch with her. I'm not able to get down there on this trip, but I'm already trying to figure out now how can I get down to have one of these conversations on camera for her, for the history.
Yeah,
I'll work on it. She said she's willing to do it and still able, and so I'm going to have to figure this out, and I will.
Yes. So now at Florida, it's a great place because it's both scholarly, very friendly. I think in the south the atmosphere is a little, more relaxed than in the up north, and
certainly not as cold.
Yes, exactly.
Especially this winter.
So I've explained a little bit what we do in the library, but I'm also involved as a faculty member. So I've taught a seminar in French law. I've coordinated a foreign enrichment class doing business in Europe with 4 faculty members from France, from the United Nations, from Germany. They've come and I coordinated the whole thing. I'm doing the MOOC that I mentioned. I also taught last semester in Poland a course, an introduction to US law. And I'm working on articles on the Convention on International Sales of Goods with one of my colleagues here.
Well, that all sounds like it must take an awful lot of time, but it must be interesting.
And it's a very pleasant environment,
Yeah.
so very good people, and the library is highly valued, and the staff is fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I will have the opportunity to meet many of your colleagues later this morning.
Yes.
We'll have lunch together. I'm looking forward to that. But this is the first time I've been in Gainesville, or even in this part of Florida. And, you know, I sort of think of Florida, I think of Miami, and that's Florida. This is all very different. It's much more of a change of season here.
Yes.
I understand. Everything, of course, is in full flower right now. The azaleas are just beautiful on the campus and elsewhere.
Yeah, and Florida, it's especially in this area, it's historically significant. There is a lot of history and culture that many people don't even know about because they come as tourists.
Yeah.
So it has been quite a good experience to be here.
Well, you know, I drove over yesterday from Tallahassee on the interstate, and we went across the bridge with the Swanee River, and the sign indicated that this was the one that the song is all about.
Oh,
and
yes.
And it was, you know, it was interesting to see it. It wasn't, you know, a huge wide thing like the Mississippi, but it was a decent river, but it was interesting to see that and make that connection.
And you know that nearby we have St. Augustine.
Oh, yeah.
Which is the oldest city in the U.S. People always talk about the Pilgrims and the Mayflower. But actually,
They came quite a bit later.
Yes, exactly.
That's right. The Spanish were here first.
And there were lots of Spanish missions, but they've been all destroyed. So.
Yeah.
But lots of history.
We've talked about your specific positions you've held at the 3 schools, but you've done a lot of other things. For example, you were president of ALL not too many years ago, 2006, 2007. You've had other roles both in ALL and other organizations. You've mentioned the New England Consortium you were part of earlier. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of that? And perhaps, since it's not that far back, some of the things that were going on in the association when you were president of ALL?
Yes, I would love to. And maybe before I do that, I can say one thing about...
Oh, please do.
Okay. Oh, I just wanted to... Talking about the University of Florida, that I wanted to show off the wonderful staff because we get together. It's a very... You know, we like to work hard, but we also like to have parties. So there was a holiday party at our house.
I recognize that venue. That's at your house.
Yes, exactly.
Where we were last night.
We have that tradition now to have a party at our house once a year. One thing I wanted to mention, which is actually maybe thanks to the profession that I got into, thanks to Cornell, maybe the highlight of my professional career was when I received the Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur medal. It's Knight of the French Legion of Honor in 2007. And in a way, I think it was for my role as a librarian, more generally for my role in bridging the legal cultures between France and the United States.
Now, on your lapel, you have the symbol of that honor.
Yes.
I want to point out, I don't know who will be able to see what, but we do have the camera trained on you.
I know, but
I'm hoping it will show up.
There is a joke about it that I read about the New York Times, like people think that it's a speck of dust, that they don't realize that it's the decoration, so it's just to put everything in perspective.
Well, it's an award that not everyone has. So you must have done something significant to get it.
But the ceremony happened in July of 2007, and it coincided with a big international conference of judges, and this picture is actually from the French Cour de Cassation, the Supreme Court, and it's in the library. And Cornell Law Library had shipped books, US Supreme Court reports, the Cornell Law Review, to the library and of the Cour de Cassation, and the French judges were really very appreciative of having these books, which we didn't need anymore since we could get them in a digital form.
You probably didn't have to tell the judges that.
Yes, exactly. But so, and then you recognize some of the justices who came, because it was the first time, I think, in centuries that several of the U.S. Supreme Court justices had come. So you recognize Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Kennedy, Justice Ginsburg, and the one in the middle, hidden, is the Lord Phillips of England. And the person who gave me the Legion was Chief Justice Lamanda, Mr. President Lamanda. And then you see here Justice Breyer in the middle, who is my favorite justice because he speaks French fluently. And when it comes to France, to speak to groups of lawyers, he can be a little critical of what's happening at the Supreme Court. So I think he feels unhinged because he speaks in French. So I think, and then you see my former dean, Dean Stuart Schwab also. So that was probably the highlight. I was involved through Cornell and my own background with many activities, both with French law libraries, but also with French judges and French courts. And Cornell started a program where we would send a Cornell law graduate as a clerk in one of the courts. So the one in the middle is Juscelino Colares, who was the Cornell clerk, and that's at the Constitutional Council. And the man next to me is Jean-Louis Debré, who is the president of the Constitutional Council. And the man on the other side is a law alumnus who helped fund the clerkship. So I was kind of involved in those roles. I was also involved in bringing Justice Canivet to Cornell, and Justice Canivet has become a good friend. He was the president of the Cour de Cassation, and now he's on the Constitutional Council. So we also started a program whereby our reference staff was helping French judges when they had legal research questions, which is kind of a nice connection between librarianship and the world of practice and the world of judges. And Justice Canivet came to speak, and you can see Professor Clermont on the left, one of my mentors. So,
well, now there you are in full glory. That's
so
the association.
Yes,
later.
we finally get to your question, and maybe just to finish with my French activities. At Cornell, I was also the director of the dual degree program, whereby every year some French students and American students would study 2 years at Cornell, study 2 years in Paris. They got an American JD, a French JD. They could sit for the New York bar and then sit for the Paris bar. So those were like completely global lawyers. So just
that's becoming more and more of a necessity in some practices now to have admission in more than one country, not just more than one U.S. state.
Yeah. So I was lucky in a way that my skills kind of coincided with the need to globalize legal education, globalize the library. So that was kind of a good way to work toward that. So I became the ALL president in 2006, and it happened to be the centennial of the association, so I thought that was nice in St. Louis, Missouri. That was a great experience. Before, I had worked in various committees and SIS. I made the transition when the foreign law, the FCIL, the Foreign Comparative and International Law SIS, transitioned from a committee to a SIS. I became the first chair, but as is often the case, you leave the room for some reason, and when you come back, they say, we're
the chair.
But that was, the opportunity to meet a lot of interesting people. And when I was the president, I started or restarted some key initiatives to improve the visibility of librarians. So one was to foster legal research as a subject specialty. So I appointed Blair Kaufman as chair of a special committee. The other one was authentication of digital law, and Judy Meadows was appointed as chair of a special committee. And there were great practical outcomes for these two initiatives, because we met with Erika Mosher, who is the president of the National Conference of Bar Examiners, to talk about legal research, to put legal research on the bar exam. And she said that it's not a question of if, but it's a question of when. Mm-hmm. So I have great hope that legal research is going to be tested because, as you know, law firms complain that law students, new graduates, don't really know how to do legal research. Yeah. So that's an issue.
Well, that's an old issue. I remember years ago in one of my jobs, I was at a school which was very highly ranked, and yet the students would come back in their second or third year, and they would have been out in the summer clerking in a law firm.
Yes.
And they were just in panic. They didn't know how to do legal research.
Yes. I know we always think it's now that it's a problem, and then you read the literature or you talk to people who are more experienced and have more years of experience, and they say it was a problem too. Yeah. It's like we say, the teachers right now, professors say students don't know how to write. But then I was reading something, I was listening to Roy Mirsky's oral history, I was reading about it, and he said back in the 80s or 90s, professors were lamenting that students don't know how to write. So
well, this problem of not being able to do research was almost 50 years ago.
I know.
So this is not new.
So it's not a question of the format, it's just the skill itself.
Yeah. Well, there's so much to learn in only 3 years in law school. Even though one can argue that it's a long time, you can't get it all even in that period of time.
Right. And then for the authentication of digital law, I commissioned, when I was president, a study of online primary sources, and that led a few years later to the adoption of the UELMA, which is the Uniform Electronic Legal Materials Act. So it was not really my doing, but I started the process. And Mary Alice Beisch, who is now the Superintendent of Documents, was crucial in that. Then Sally Holterhoff, who became the next president, worked on this, continued the initiative. And then Barbara Bitcliffe was the reporter for the Uniform Law Project.
Well, Mary Alice Beisch was actually worked for ALL in those days.
At the time, yes.
Washington Affairs representative.
Exactly. So in that was in that role that she was a crucial element. And when I think about all these activities, I think that we are, the best way to express it, we are kind of links in a chain. And that's why it works so well in the library profession, because nobody has such an ego that they want to say, I'm the one who did it. We all work together, and I didn't start the legal research competency project. I think Roy Mirsky was very involved, other people were involved, but I restarted it. And I think I started the digital project, but I didn't know that it would end up in a uniform law, which now has been adopted in several states.
I remember years ago when everything was still in paper, every once in a while in a reporter, in the advance sheets, which were the temporary sheets when the cases first came out, there would be a case, an opinion in there, and then when the final bound volume came out, there'd be something else at those pages because the courts in some jurisdictions can withdraw opinions. And that would have occurred, so it would be yanked from the publication, but after it was already out in the advance sheets, it just wouldn't be in the permanent. And people were concerned because you rarely, but sometimes get a citation that just didn't seem to make any sense. But with digital, that is so much easier to do at any point. I mean, something can be removed from the data and something new or reworded. Or, so your work with authenticating, this is the version, has got to have been very important and a long time coming.
Especially now that we're all throwing books away and we don't have print materials anymore because it has become too expensive. So you really want to, it's maybe the most successful activity of ALL as an advocacy group. And now we're taking it internationally because we're discussing it at the IFLA level. So.
Good.
So that was fun. So that was with the executive board of ALL.
I noticed the next slide, if it's if I can be so bold, is probably moving us into some of your other major accomplishment as a professional, and that is your scholarship and work of that sort. Am I jumping ahead, or is that
no,
an appropriate thing to introduce?
No, you had asked me earlier why, why I thought it was important to write in a prolific way. And my answer to that, and I did write a book, a big book actually. It's
Why don't you hold it up here? Yes, we can see it. Hold it up a little higher, because yeah.
It's very thick.
Yeah.
I wrote it in 1991.
Germain's
and then it
International Legal Research.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a.
And then it was updated regularly through 2006. And you asked me, why did I write so much? But actually,
Well, anytime I talk to somebody as prolific and skilled at this as you have been, I like to pose some version of that question.
Yes.
Because it is important, I think, and you obviously do too. But you like to respond to it now.
Yes, and actually my response is that I didn't do it strategically for strategic reasons. I just did it because it seemed to be natural, it seemed to be the right thing to do, because I wanted to take the whole of international and foreign law that people don't understand much about and then explain to, it was intended for US lawyers, people who don't know much about these areas, how to serve process, what goes into it, how to deal with an international sales contract, how to deal with an antitrust problem, and show them which materials they could go to answer their questions. So, I didn't do it thinking about a particular goal for it, but I just had maybe a need to do it and maybe the energy at the time. So it did take a long time. Now, I think it did get me the job at Cornell and the faculty status, because but I didn't do it thinking about it, so it was kind of a nice side benefit of it. So I would encourage aspiring directors to publish because I think it matters, and I think it, especially if you want to have a good faculty status, it does make a difference.
The regular faculty, I guess, is how I should refer to it, the normal subject professors and teachers. Publication for many of them is just part of the job, and something that they just do, and they look at a librarian or anybody else on the faculty, and I guess understandably figure, well, you're a faculty member, so you should teach, and you're a faculty member, so you ought to contribute to the scholarship a bit too. So those are all important, especially for a director who is basically sitting in both the faculty and the library.
Yes, and I know that yourself, you were very influential. You taught substantive law courses.
Well, I did.
Were the chair of the faculty senate. That's quite a major accomplishment.
Yeah. So you did some research on me to see what I'd like to do about it.
Well, I had a fascinating experience doing a lot of that. It was a nice way to connect to students in a way I couldn't as director of the library. As a faculty member, I had a couple of classes a year. And then, of course, in my involvement with politics, or whatever you want, governance, I think is the right word on the campus, I got to know people all over the campus, faculty members in all other disciplines, people in the administration. It was a wonderful experience. I would recommend it to anybody. A number of our colleagues have done that sort of thing and really enjoyed it. And done some very good things for the school. I mean, the faculty governance is serious, taken seriously. They really do contribute an awful lot to the direction of the school and some of the more practical nuts and bolts aspects. We had to vote on things like the benefits package and any changes in the health benefits especially were important to make sure we're adequate to the needs, that sort of thing.
So you've done some of that. Well, I guess we're, I don't want to get ahead of the slideshow. If there's anything particularly you want to highlight there before we start talking about nearing the end of the conversation today.
Well, you had asked me a question about you've done much more in terms of professional service than being ALL president. Could could you talk about some of these other activities?
Well, that's right. I mean, when we sort of mentioned mine, you're not supposed to talk about mine. I had my interview.
I don't want to take too long about some of the other activities.
But you've done a lot.
But I did some interesting things. We, because of the fact that we had the Donovan Archive, we were called by the International Criminal Court in Arusha, Tanzania, and we were asked to do some consulting there in Tanzania about talk to the judges about how to preserve their archives. That was very exciting. And then we took advantage of it, my husband and I, to do a little visit with the Maasais. So that was very good. And then I spent some time doing some consulting at the Supreme Court of Puerto Rico, and I got to know some of my wonderful colleagues from Puerto Rico. So Yvette Torres is the Supreme Court librarian, Pedro Padilla and Lisette work at the University of Puerto Rico. So then I came back to Puerto Rico several times. We had ILL and IFLA meetings, and then also just for fun. So I did enjoy those activities. Some, professional activities that stand out also was I was asked to be the keynote speaker in Brazil, and you can see the Chief Justice Ellen Gracier. It was back in 2007 with the Law Librarian of Congress and the assistant to the Law Librarian of Congress. And then we went from Brasilia to Rio. And then thanks to my colleague Radu Popa, who is at NYU and who administers the SARC Foundation grant, we held a workshop at Cornell that brought together librarians from Africa, from Brazil, from the US, from other parts of the world. So that was very... I also did, I was involved with various projects. I had a meeting in Seoul. I did some consulting with the International Criminal Court in The Hague, and so on. And I'm very involved now with IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations. And recently, I was elected to the International Academy of Comparative Law, so I'm doing work in that area.
Well, it sounds like you have reached out in terms of service, well beyond where I ever did. I mean, I was active on campus and in the associations, but not in the broader international community. Sounds like you've had some interesting visits and met a lot of interesting people and seen some fun places to see.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
As well as done good work.
Yes.
That sounds like a marvelous combination. Yeah. Well, we're sort of nearing the end of our of today's conversation, but even though we've talked about a lot of things, it's sort of my custom to ask if there's anything that we haven't talked about that you would like to mention before we conclude.
Well, I've already taken a lot of your time, but what I think has worked well is that I've worked in 3 schools where the global perspective was appreciated, and it's good that my background was international enough, but also conversant in US law, that I could fit into a variety of projects. So I've had I think a very good career because of that. So one thing maybe I could say about how I see the present and future role of librarians, I really would like a lot of emphasis to be put on advancing scholarship, because I think sometimes librarians see themselves more as technicians, like everybody wants to be techno-savvy, new ways to download an app and so on. And you really need very strong techno-savvy staff members, and because things change so quickly. But never forget that you're a subject specialist, to put your legal knowledge to good use. And I would advance the concept of scholarship plus. Some people have said now you need to think in terms of digital plus, but I would say scholarship plus. That's my
in other words, sort of think strategically and guide and rely on people with more precise expertise in the digital stuff to work with them.
Yes, exactly. But it's so good to have that legal subject expertise. Something that regular librarians don't necessarily have, because we have more than just 1 year. We have 3 years of schooling.
That's right.
So I enjoy very much what I do at the University of Florida, and also I'm involved in the summer program that we have in Paris and Montpellier, where we take students. So that's also a fun part of the job.
Well, can I ask you a question we didn't talk about in advance? Have you ever given any thought to retirement? It sounds like you are going full guns. You're retired from Cornell, but you're not retired.
Well, I see that as a new chapter in my life, because being in Florida, it's like being in a different country.
Yeah.
We've explored it as if it were a new country. And it frees me to have this chance to be here, because I know that I can do it as long as I enjoy it. And it's important for me to be able to go back to France. We have a pied-à-terre in Paris, so which was flooded recently, but it's another story. It's being fixed. So, so I don't know. Maybe, you know, as long as I enjoy it and I feel that I have the strength to do it, I will do it.
Well, you might follow one of our esteemed colleagues of our era, Roy Mirsky. I mean, he stayed in the position literally into his 80s, his mid-80s. So,
maybe not that long. I don't know.
Maybe not that long. Well, many of us have retired. I've been retired, as you know, for a few years now.
Yes.
I'm enjoying it, of course, partly because I have this opportunity to go around and meet so many of my old friends. And
you're doing such a good job.
Thank
I mean,
you. I'm enjoying it immensely. As anybody that's heard my part of some of these conversations has already picked up on. So I think in retirement, it's good to have something to do. It doesn't necessarily have to be this, but travel or whatever is good. But you know, but my advice also is, you know, don't do it until you feel you're ready for it. You can, and you know, assuming your health doesn't deteriorate before. So they're good years.
Good advice.
Yeah, I hope so.
Well, I thank you. I'm so grateful to you for allowing me to speak and share a little bit about my story.
Well, so thank you, Claire Germain, for being part of today's conversation. I want to thank you not only on my behalf, but also on behalf of Michelle Wu, Frank Hodek, and Dick Spinelli, with whom I have the honor. There are colleagues with whom I work in developing this oral history of law librarianship for the Spinelli's Law Library Reference Shelf section of Hein Online. Thank you.
Very good.